we got a middleweight contest up next. We got Julian Marquez, the Cuban Missile Crisis, back in the octagon, taking on Zach the Savage Reese. And Zach Reese is a guy that had a lot of hype coming into the UFC. He beat Eli Aronoff on the Contender Series. I remember thinking to myself, Aronoff was live coming into that fight. I was very surprised Aronoff elected to grapple, so aggressively in that fight. I thought that what he would have wanted to do in that fight, land a couple shots on Reese, bust him up a little bit, then take it to the ground. And instead, we saw he kind of rushed that fight, takes it to the ground. Zach Reese has a nasty armbar. If you want to credit this guy, you say, hey, this guy has an armbar win over Eli Aronoff. He had a submission win over Aaron Phillips, in 2023 in Fury FC in the first round very quickly. He had a triangle choke on the amateur scene, a rear naked choke on the amateur scene, a guillotine on the amateur scene, and his loss back in 2012 on the amateur scene was to Kevin Holland. So this guy has been around for a while. He's not a slouch. He's a guy that clearly, when he stepped up in competition, it hasn't gone his way. He lost to Kevin Holland way back on the amateurs, and then he steps up in a UFC debut against Cody Brundage. He got slam knocked out. The problem for me is I think Cody Brundage is not very good, right? And I think Cody Brundage has been enhancement talent since he got to the UFC. I mean that with all due respect. I think some of the wins he's gotten has surprised even the organization, right? Like him knocking out Tresean Gore. I didn't see that coming. I don't think they saw that coming. But when you look the Zach Reese fight, I had a feeling that there was something fishy about the Zach Reese line. He was favored coming into that fight, and I thought Cody Brundage was no good. I mentioned that. But he's minus 225, right? Minus 230, 70% against a guy in Cody Brundage who'd been out there a number of times in the UFC. And sometimes we don't give any credence to UFC experience. We say, hey, this guy stinks. We've seen him lose to so many guys. But you also have to run this thought experiment in your head, in my opinion. What's one good way to do it is to say, how would Zach Reese have fared if he was against the same level of UFC competition? Would he have beaten these guys? Because if not, then this guy losing to them maybe doesn't mean as much, right? Maybe it's a little bit less significant. And I think that Zach Reese is a guy that is all right. But you go back and look at his wins. What are his best wins? I mean, his best wins in his career. Eli Aronoff, a 6-0 prospect who really hasn't proven much, and Aaron Phillips, a 6-3 guy at the time, currently an 8-5 guy. Nothing to write home about with all due respect. An Ultimate Fighter guy who got guillotine choked by Petrosky in the first round. So he's all right. I think of this guy, Julian Marquez, as a fighter who's decent. He's nothing that's going to blow your hair back. He's pretty average everywhere. But when you look at Julian Marquez, he's been training at the MMA lab, right? He's been pictured with guys like Jared Cannonier, putting in work, trying to get better. Looks like he's working on his jiu-jitsu and his grappling. And I think he's a former Krause guy, if my memory serves. You look back, this guy's striking is all right. It's nothing to write home about, in my view. He's got some power. His knockout of Phil Hawes was frankly sickening. Back in 2017, held his head in position, bing, bang, boom, put the head kick on him, ting, popped his head back. Paul Felder on the call, brilliant. It was just a brutal, brutal knockout. And you saw what Julian Marquez is capable of with his power. But he's not a very active fighter, right? You look back, he beat Darren Stewart via front choke. Then he loses a split decision to Alessio Di Chirico. He missed weight for that fight as well. So not a great look there. Then the Maki Pitolo fight. He didn't win hardly a minute of that fight, a second of that fight. But Maki Pitolo found a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, get submitted late. That is a good quality from Julian Marquez, his ability to rally late in fights and find ways to win them when they go sideways. Then the Sam Alvey fight, guys. I'm telling you, I couldn't find a good video to share on Twitter, but this, when you look at that Julian Marquez submission of Sam Alvey, it's got to be up there with the most violent submissions in the history of the UFC, dude. It was like he was trying to pop Sam Alvey's head off. Sam Alvey just looked like he was being hung. It was really, really brutal stuff. So you look at a guy like Julian Marquez and you say, what are his best assets? Like, what does he bring to the table? This guy is 4-0 career to the submission, right? Nobody's ever made this guy say uncle. And Zach Reese He's got 2 out of his 6 career wins via submission, right? And on the regional scene, on the amateur scene, it was way more than that. Okay. So against his highest level opposition, Aaron Phillips and Eli Aronoff, he relied on the submission both times. Now he's got a guy who's never been submitted here in Julian Marquez. I think that's an interesting note. On the other side, Marc-Andre Barrio is a cardio machine, right? He just goes out there and throws volume nonstop from the beginning to the end. And unless you could kill him, unless you could hurt him really bad and get some respect, he's just going to keep throwing. He has no regard for what's coming back his way. Gregory Rodriguez is a guy who's like fringe ranked guy. And when you look at his skills, he's disgusting on the mat, right? So what is Julian Marquez going to do? Try and take him down, be better at jiu-jitsu? That's not going to happen. So he's kind of stuck on the feet with this guy, and he got brutalized. Julian Marquez, he's had a ton of cancellations. You look at the Duran Win fight, Win withdrew from that fight. You look at the Turman fight, Turman withdrew from that fight. You look at the Dawkins fight, Marquez withdrew from that fight. Then you look at the Jordan Wright fight, Marquez had health issues. So Marquez has been dealing with health issues. He's not been extremely or supremely active throughout the course of his recent run. But when I look at the body of work, he's fighting much better competition overall. I think that Sam Alvey, Mackie Patolo, Darren Stewart, and Phil Haas are all better wins than any win on Zachary Reese's record. So I believe that the better body of work and quality of opposition is Marquez. I think he's had more impressive wins. I think he's had better submissions. However, it's hard to back a guy at chalk coming off of 2 straight losses. And meanwhile, he's coming into this fight. Zach Reese was attempting offense, much like Joe Solecki. He was attempting offense with that armbar, got picked up by Cody Brundage, who's a strong physical guy, and slammed on his head. You do have to wonder to yourself, is Julian Marquez in the same physical condition, healthy enough, disciplined enough and everything to stand up out of a submission like that, go for the slam? I do think that's an open question. Meanwhile, he's 34 years of age, no spring chicken, definitely up there in age and not super active. Neither one of these guys have fought since 2023, but it's been a year for Julian Marquez. It's been just 6 months for Zach Reese. So he fought late in the year, and then Julian Marquez fought earlier on in the year. Then you're looking at Zach Reese is going to have all the anthropomorphic advantages coming into this fight. He's going to stand 6'4" compared to 6'2" for Julian Marquez. He's going to have about a 5-inch reach advantage in the fight. He's going to be 4 years younger. So you can paint a colorable case for backing Zach Reese as an underdog here. But my problem with backing Zach Reese, or my problem with extending on a guy like this, is number one, Julian Marquez, he has been finished in his last 2 fights, but I have no reason to believe Zach Reese would win fights against those guys, right? I think that that's still an open question at best. We have no evidence that suggests Zach Reese can fight into round 2 or round 3 at a high clip. So for Marquez, training with the lab seems like he's putting himself in a better situation. And on top of that, I think he's probably the more proven grappler. I think he's probably the more proven striker. It's like, I don't know. I don't know what to make of this fight, but for me, the simple answer when I'm looking at this fight is I would rather take the under 1.5 rounds, I think, than invest in either one of these guys personally. I also think the ends by submission is kind of interesting because Zach Reese showed, against high-level fighters, the way he's gotten it done is via submission. For Julian Marquez, he's a pretty dangerous submission guy in his own right. I do think that is his most likely path to victory in these fights this day and age is to go out there and get submissions. So that's the way I see it. Interesting spot, violent ending is what I'm expecting here. I think somebody's going to get finished in the first 2 rounds of this fight at a pretty high clip. Shout out to my guy Dixon in the chat, says, word on the street is that Julian is here because he needs a paycheck, Liam. I believe that. Crazy to me, says Cole Stein, how Reese's first pro MMA fight was on the exact same date as Marquez's last win. Shout out to whoever posted that to Twitter. That's hysterical. I think that, Julian definitely capable of getting a win, but it has been 3 years. Sam Alvey was on the last legs of his UFC career, but Sam Alvey, was a long-term guy, stuck around for a long time, hurt guys, landed impactful shots, even in a lot of the fights he lost. The reason he kept getting his contract extended and stuff was because he was, a friendly enough guy to the UFC brass. but also because he almost knocked out Ryan Spann, and he had a bunch of very close fights along the way. So I think that you really got to respect that he's getting back in. Sam Alvey's still out there in karate combat doing the damn thing. Shout out to my guy, MMA Line Mover, says happy birthday, bro. Appreciate you, my dog. And with that being said, guys, we can move along to this next fight.